Good afternoon. This is one in a series of videos that I'm going to post to try to provide additional guidance on completion of your math consultation project. So I'm in Blackboard and I have clicked on the math consultation project page. If you'll notice, there is the first thing that pops up are the guidelines for the project. It tells you that your assessment summary draft is due by March 2nd and represents 6 points of the total project score. If you need until March 3rd at 11:59, let me double check my calendar. That will be okay. Some of you may not be able to finish your assessment until Thursday, so I will give you till Friday to turn it in, but it must be done no later than March 3rd, and 6% of your total project score is dependent upon that submission, and then your instructional recommendations draft is going to be due on March 9th by 11:59 p.m., and we will be having class on that day. If you click into the consultation project, you'll notice that you can download the guidelines, and I'm getting ready to go through some of that with you. You can also view the rubric, which tells you how your total project will be scored. So 25% comes from the assessment summary. Remember that once you submit your draft, I will give you feedback, and then you'll have an opportunity to revise that. Section 2 is your instructional recommendations. Same thing. You'll submit it to me. You'll have an opportunity to receive feedback and to do a revision. Section 3 is your follow-up consultation summary. This is the one part that you will do on your own without submitting a draft first. You'll also do a self-reflection, and I've added a section to give you a grade on the quality of your writing, because remember, our goal here is that you demonstrate professional writing, the type of writing that you would actually do in the field if you were assessing and doing intervention on a student. So that will give you some additional information about how it's going to be scored. And then let me go back to that previous page. You get 6 points here in the assessment for the assessment summary draft, and you can look, this is a very simple rubric. Either you don't do it or you don't do it by the deadline. You include most of the required components, and it's mostly comprehensible. That'll get you 4.25 points. You get 6 points if you include all of the required components, and I can understand your writing, and I can tell that you've taken an effort in or put effort into your work. Does that mean it will be perfect? No, because all of you who have had me before, and those of you who haven't, will soon learn that I'm going to give you feedback about everything that you do. But it means that you made a strong effort and that you got it submitted in a timely manner. If you do not submit by that deadline, again, I will send an announcement March 3rd at 11:59 p.m., then that means that there is no way to earn back any of those 6 points that are available for that portion of the project. Okay. So now let's go ahead and review the project guidelines. I've downloaded it, and I'd like to review some of the critical information here with you. Notice that what your summary should include. You're going to describe your student, their age, their grade level, their race, ethnicity, or at least your perception of that, their language status. So I want to know what language or languages does the student speak, and if you can find out, it would be helpful to know if the student is an English learner, because that's going to give you additional information that's critical in planning instruction for that student. If you have a way of finding it out, and sometimes they don't know at the center, but if you're aware that your student has a diagnosed or has been identified as having a disability, please make sure you include that information as well. I ask that you observe a tutoring session, so if at all possible, you will watch the tutor work, usually with a small group of students. You'll be able to focus on what kinds of activities they do. You'll be able to focus on how your student seems to respond in the tutoring. Remember, we are not there to critique the tutors or to provide necessarily, we'll provide suggestions for ideas and activities they can do to enhance the student's skills. But the purpose of this is just really to observe that interaction and be able to get a feel for how that child is responding in that tutorial session. You've been given, there's a video posted, and we went through in class information about the specific assessments that you're going to do. Remember that on the benchmark curriculum-based measure off of the DIBELS website that you're going to do, you need to send me your students' responses to the 35 items so that I can enter them in and send you a profile. Then you're going to do a second assessment, most of you will be doing the CBM progress monitoring probes. Some of you, if you're working with students at younger grades or in first grade, and some of you may choose in second grade to use the TEMI. And then remember, you're all going to do the numeracy, and I believe it's called numeracy or numeration subtest. That's part of the key math, because that's going to give you a starting point for making sure that you can assess in one other area. What I want you to do is look at that profile, look at that student score, see, identify strengths that the student has, identify needs, and then do your second key math subtest in what you perceive to be an area of need, because it'll give you more information. It also tells you to make sure that you can assess, you have some assessment information related to the 3 critical areas of math instruction. What does that really mean? It means you have something related to numeration, or what we call numeracy, number sense, that you have some information about how that child performs in terms of computation, and that you have some information about problem solving. You're going to get that from the measures that you do. You don't necessarily have a separate measure for each of those things, but you should be able to comment on the child's skill in all of those areas. And then you need to think about, what does that really mean? So, what are their strengths? What are their needs? Okay, that's going to help you identify that, because that information is going to be critical when you complete your instructional recommendation summary, which is due the following week. And when you do your instructional recommendations, remember, you're going to submit things to me on the 3rd in terms of your assessment summary. I will try to turn those around by Monday, so that you have my feedback on the assessment summary and you can develop your instructional recommendations. So in your instructional recommendations, you're going to share with the center and with the tutors that work with the student, what are their specific strengths that you identified. They can be both things that the tutor mentioned to you, things you observed, and also certainly should include the results of your assessment. You're going to identify specific needs that that student has in terms of math performance. And even, let's say you work with one of those students who does very, very well, and they show significant competence across all areas of math. You're still going to think about, what would you do to provide enrichment, or what other kinds of supports would you provide, or instruction, what kind of instruction would you provide for that student. You're going to develop a measurable goal. This is one of the most challenging things, I think, for most students. It's something that we must become proficient at, because all special educators should be able to produce a measurable goal. And remember, that goal is going to include a condition, so the circumstances under which the child is going to perform, the behavior, which is what the child will do, and the criteria by which you will measure whether or not the child has met your objective. So, for instance, if you're looking at mathematics, and let's say you're going to work with your student on a computation goal, then you might say, given the DIBELS, benchmark assessment or progress monitoring measure, which might be the tool that you're going to use to assess, the student will complete 12 out of 30 or whatever number of mathematics problems it is with, 80% accuracy by and give the date. Now, I always say be careful of percentages, because the percentage has to be able to work for the number of problems you have. Sometimes it's easier to do a ratio. So if you say the student's going to complete 12 problems, you can say with 10 out of 12 correct. If you have questions or you're having trouble coming up with your measurable goal, please see me, or your objective. Make sure that it's one sentence. So sometimes people give me a paragraph. A goal should be one clearly understood sentence that anybody who reads it says, oh, this is, the circumstances under which the child is going to perform, demonstrate a certain knowledge or skill, and this is how I'm going to tell whether they did it to a sufficient degree of accuracy or completeness, whatever it is you're measuring, okay? You're going to have a mechanism for gathering weekly progress monitoring data. You can choose, and it needs to obviously align with whatever your intervention is going to be. You can use some of the tools that are there. We have those weekly progress monitoring probes for the grade levels. That's something that you can use if it seems appropriate for your students. And yes, we do have those available at 4th grade. at first grade. It's just going to depend on what skills you're working on. If you're, again, having difficulty thinking about what you need to do, please remember that I'm available to talk with you, consult with you, make sure that you feel confident about what you're doing. And then you're going to schedule a time to talk with one of your tutors. One of the tutors, usually you'll notice that, I know you've all seen that the school students are now in groups and they may have 1 or 2 or 3 tutors that they're working with. Reach out, find a time to speak to one of those folks in that team. They ask that we please do this outside of school hours. I think in previous semesters, what's worked well is to set up a time to visit, maybe by phone in the evening, go over your recommendations, give the person time to ask questions. Everybody we're working with has a notebook at the center, and you can go there and put in your written report and any materials that you want the tutor to consider using, your progress monitoring measures. But it's helpful if you can at least have a conversation about what that's going to be, and then you write up how you think that went. So those will be the first 2 parts. Again, assessment summary due no later than March 3rd at 11:59 p.m. Instructional recommendation summary due on the 9th of March no later than 11:59 p.m. When you go back to do your follow-up consultation, you're going to make sure that you're observing tutoring again, if at all possible, and then you're going to reassess the student. Now, we don't have multiple versions of the key math, but obviously for the other measures that you're using, you're going to use, for your benchmark, you're going to use the end of the year benchmark to see how the students performed and how they've done over time. For the progress monitoring probes, you're going to use probes that are different than the one you previously used or that they tutors have been using. If you recommend those, they use those. Remember, all those progress monitoring probes are at the same level. And what we expect is students to have more digits correct over time. If you're doing TEMI, again, you're going to go back and give the end of the year measure on that, Form C. And then you're going to repeat the key math. Unfortunately, like I said, we don't have a different version, but we're going to hope that this student does not have that much memory of the previously administered measure. It would be obviously more effective if we have Form B, so we could go back and use a different form of the test, but based on the funding that we have available to purchase assessment materials, we won't be able to do that. Okay? You're going to talk about how well the student did in terms of making progress in math during the period of time that we've been working with them. You're going to visit a little bit with a tutor, again, not during tutoring time, to talk about how things went, whether they were able to implement any of your recommendations, how they felt about those, summarize that meeting, and then make additional recommendations for what you might think would be appropriate if someone continues to work with that student, because obviously we're going to be gone the 1st of May, but the folks at the center are going to continue to work with that student until school's out, and many of those students will be back next year. And so it will be helpful for the center to have an idea of where you would go from here, or where once our time there is over, what you would additionally recommend. And then the last thing that you're going to do is include a self-reflection. And what I really want you to think about is, what were your strengths and how did you use them in completing the project, things that you learned with respect to both the conduct of consultation and your role in the process. So how was it going in, working with other folks? I think one of the hardest things, it's certainly difficult for me, I anticipate that it will be difficult for some of you, is sometimes it's hard to have ideas and share them with someone and feel like maybe they weren't used as effectively or consistently as they should have been, that their follow-through wasn't there. And so think about, what did you do to support the tutor? What did you do to, provide resources that would be accessible for them? And what would you do differently in the future? And these should be things that are within your control. So I know you might say, well, one of the things I would do is I would restructure tutoring at the center. That might be something that you would be interested in doing, or I would group the children differently or something like that. That's not our role there. So I want you to think about, what are things that you yourself would do differently, or how would you leverage those skills that you've developed to be able to use them in the future. As always, direct your questions to me. I look forward to seeing your work, and I will tell you that I visited the center today. It's Thursday, the 23rd of February. The folks at the center have said that things are going well and that they're very, very pleased to have you there. And in fact, there's one student that we didn't assign anyone to, and the father was really disappointed that she wasn't going to get to work with one of our students, and so I'm going to go do the assessment on that job. Okay, you all take care. And again, not a videographer, not an actor, so forgive any disfluencies in the conduct or in the recording of this video, but I hope that you find it helpful. I realize there's one thing I forgot to show you in this math consultation project tab, and that is I went through and showed you the rubric and where you would submit the assessment summary draft. There's also a link for the instructional recommendations draft. And if you go into that folder, it's where you can submit your draft by the 9th of March. And you'll notice there's a very similar rubric. In fact, it's exactly the same rubric that I'm going to use to give you feedback on your assessment summary. Again, the big issue is, did you turn it in on time? Does it include all of the required components, and can I understand it? So please make sure that you adhere to those guidelines and you submit those items in a timely manner so that you can earn those points that count toward your total grade. Remember that I did post for you the PowerPoint that talks about the various assessments that you need to conduct, and there's also a video, if you haven't watched it yet, that gives you some additional feedback on how to conduct those assessments and what the assessment process should be when you're at the Garcia Center.